Now, we know what Chairman Bernanke said today at his historic news conference. Now let's try to read between the lines. My next guest is an expert at interpreting body language and mannerisms. Greg Hartley is a Desert Storm veteran. He's also a human behavior consultant, a graduate of the U.S. Army Interrogation School, and the author of books such as The Most Dangerous Book You'll Ever Read. And he's also the author of Get People to Do What You Want. Greg Hartley, good to have you with us on Bloomberg. Now, I know that watching television and watching Ben Bernanke might be different than being there in person, but what were you able to pick up on by watching the Federal Reserve Chief's news conference today?
Well, there were a few interesting things for me. I fully expected to see a more polished Ben Bernanke than I did. He looked very uncomfortable. He looked very edgy. Obviously, it's a new venue for him, but it's not the first time he's ridden this. So it was interesting to see how glitchy his mannerisms were in terms of cadence and his closed body language. What he probably did not convey well is an openness that was actually there as he answered questions. You have to be very cautious in that what people perceive is always the most important piece. Perception's everything, even if it's not what you're trying to send.
Were you surprised, Greg, that he didn't use a teleprompter, particularly on a day when the inventor of the teleprompter is reported to have died after all these years? But he didn't use a teleprompter, and you can see him looking down, reading his statement.
You know, it's interesting because much of the time he was looking down and to his left. If you noticed, his eyes were drifting down and to the left. He was answering candidly, not during the statement reading, but actually when he was answering questions, he would look down and to his left. For Americans, we're very focused on eye movement and on punctuation with our hands. If a person's eyes are here and they're not looking you in the eyes, we don't trust them. But the good thing is his inner voice, his inner conversation as his eyes drifted down to the left to answer questions, told me he was answering candidly and not with prepared answers for questions.
Now,
but I was surprised that he did not teleprompt.
Now, you're an interrogation specialist. You've trained military personnel how to interrogate people to find out things that they don't want to tell you. Should the press have done something different? Would the press have been better prepared if they had followed some of your interrogation techniques?
Well, I think many of you have a natural talent for it, but what I think they could have done is to set him up for more stressful questions, for questions that forced him to think outside the box. He was clearly within his wheelhouses. He would answer questions that required him to do inner voice. There are a couple of occasions when there was clearly an emotional response. You notice his eyes drifted down and to his right when he talked about the long-term unemployed, and I saw hopelessness in that face. That's not a good thing for me to see sitting where I'm at, but at the same time, it's a natural human reaction for him to feel very emotional about it. The only other emotional time I saw was when he was talking about Japan, another appropriate response, but it tells us that he is less than polished in terms of hiding his emotions and in terms of how he responds. Much better if you look at an Obama who does teleprompt, but who goes off teleprompter and engages you, much more effective. Later in his conversation, as he was answering questions, his hands started to punctuate, his body started to open, his shoulders became more square, and he became less glitchy and less pinched in his voice. So it was good to see that he got more comfortable as time went. And I think the next time we'll see an even more polished person, but he could use some coaching.
Now, you have helped multinational forces with their interrogation exercises, and you mentioned something particular about Americans, that they look for eye contact. Can you give us some other specifics that are connected to the way Americans relate to body language as opposed to other cultures?
You know, in our natural tendency, we want openness. We want to see hands move. Not as much as Mediterranean cultures like Greece and Italy, but we want to see punctuation. We want to see openness. We don't like this arm crossing, this barriering. And at one point, his hands were stuck under his arms. Looked totally inappropriate for the message he was delivering. We like that open, fluid conversation, that more aggressive, forward speaking. And when we find a person whose eyes are shifty, as we refer to them, we don't trust them. We already don't trust people who talk about things behind closed doors. So it projects even more of that image. We make about 50% eye contact because when we're thinking, our eyes are moving constantly as we think about the past, as we think about the future and possibilities. Our eyes are constantly moving, but we notice eye contact that 50% of the time. And 85% of Americans believe they can tell when someone's lying because he doesn't make eye contact.
Now, Greg, Ben Bernanke has appeared before Congress many times. He gives speeches in public. What would you suggest he do to perhaps offer even more transparency? He spoke about transparency and said that is a major goal of the Federal Reserve System.
Well, you know, when I watch him, I thought he was fairly transparent because I could see that he was talking about something and answering from his mind, not from a prepared statement. But that's not for every person to see. That opening of the body language so people trust him is more. It's more about perception. It's more about spin. Unfortunately, in our world, as many cameras as there are, you have to portray yourself as what people are looking for. And every person sitting in your audience remembers high school psychology saying that when a person crosses their arms, they're blocking you out.
Now, as a graduate of the U.S. Army Interrogation School, can you give business people one bit of advice that may help them in their business? What's the best thing for them to polish?
Well, interestingly, active listening is the best thing you can learn in business. Everyone around you knows something you don't know, and our natural tendency is to fill in those gaps when we're talking. So if you'll be quiet and listen to the people sitting around you, knowledge and wisdom come from every level of people around you. When we collect intelligence, we collect from the street sweeper, the receptionist, and the executive.
Have to leave it there. Greg Hartley, he's the author of such books as I Know What You're Thinking.